And we are looking for Paul Maslansky's home here in Malibu. He has produced 7 Police Academy films, are all very successful. So he's a very successful veteran Hollywood producer here. We have a special guest. His name is Paul Maslansky, who is a producer of Police Academy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Oh, actually, number 7. So let's get to know him and see what he's doing now that he is a Hollywood veteran in Hollywood.
Well, thank you, Ace. I'm glad that we're spending some time together. For background, I've been around for quite a while.
My audience are really first-time filmmakers, and they want to know how you got started.
Educated in New York City, went to Washington University in Virginia, history major. After that, went into the Army for a couple of years, and after the Army, I decided to go to Europe. And I wanted to go to Europe to play in bands in Europe. So in 1959, I went to Paris, brought my trumpet with me, and $500, which I had after the service. I met a young Danish filmmaker in Paris. He was going to the film school there. His name was Benny Corson, wonderful guy. And that's how I started. I had to raise some money. I went to the Fulbright people in town in Paris, and they said, you know, if you make a really good picture that we like, black and white, 30 minutes, 16 millimeter, we'll give you $1,500 for it. And that was my budget. So we made this little picture.
Now, as a filmmaker during that time, you were 26 then, how were you able to survive or make money?
I was teaching English at Berlitz in Paris, and I was playing music, so I was supporting myself. Just the process of putting together this documentary, and Benny directed it beautifully, and Melvin Van Peebles, who a lot of people might remember his name.
Mario Van Peebles is?
His dad. That was his dad. Melvin was living in Paris at the time, and I met him through somebody else in Paris at a cafe. I needed somebody to write a scenario, a script. I met Melvin, and Melvin, for $50, wrote a script for me. We became friends. Columbia Screen Gems was short of product at the time. Benny entered our picture into the Short Film Festival in Cannes, and it won a modest prize for a first-time director. Screen Gems bought the picture for $1,500. I paid the whole thing. Saw my name on the picture when they screened it, and it was an interesting movie. At that time, Charlie Schneer, who was a very famous American producer who was producing things like Mysterious Island, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, with Ray Harryhausen, one of the great developers of special effects in the world, was making a picture called Jason and the Argonauts. All the logistics of making a big movie I learned on Jason and the Argonauts. And then Easy Rider came along, not my picture. Boy, it changed everything. And that was in 1971, and Easy Rider came to Cannes. There was Nicholson and Hopper and Fonda, and they were the toast of the Croisette and Cannes. That's when everything changed in the American film industry, because before then, the studios were making these big epics. They were making Cleopatra and Ben-Hur and Dr. Zhivago and the Longships and the Vikings, things that required hundreds of extras. As a result of Easy Rider, though, a picture made for $300,000 and some odd that did exceptionally well, but most importantly, touched into the vein of a new audience, an audience of 18 to 25, a very vital audience. This was the beginning of the hippie movement. This is the drug culture going on. This is the anti-Vietnam period. This is the period of rebellion, of youth in America. And the American film industry made a real U-turn there, a real turn around, and started to appeal to a younger audience. After spending all this time in Europe, the only people that kind of remained, Americans that remained in Europe, were people like Clint Eastwood, was doing his
spaghetti
westerns, a few others, and then of course eventually all of Clint came back, Lee Van Cleef came back, Eli Wallach, Henry Silva, all the people that were doing these westerns in Rome.
But the biggest film that gave you recognition was Police Academy, right?
Yeah. The first Police Academy, first of all, I was 49 years old. I'd made 20-some-odd movies, some successful, some not so successful. Every one of them I liked myself, I personally liked, and I have great memories of. In any event, I was between movies. I just finished a lovely picture with Amy Madigan her first movie called Love Child that Larry Pierce directed brilliantly. We needed off-duty policemen. I was there at 6 in the morning when a busload of off-duty policemen, and a very exotic-looking group they were. They were racially mixed. They were tall, short, fat, thin, and they lined up in a very curious fashion. And I smiled. I laughed. I turned to the officer that was with them, and I said, "Who are these people?" Because I could only use about 10 of them because they didn't fit the particular requisites for Wall Street at that time, policemen. And they said, well, the regular off-duty policemen are working today up at the stadium, but we sent you police cadets. I said, these your future finest? And he said, well, we have a mayor that insists on fair employment hiring. And he looked around and said, but we can flunk them out after 2 weeks. And I looked at them, and they were so willing. They all had such a good attitude, I thought. I said, what if they all wanted to stay in the police academy? They didn't want to be flunked out. And that night I wrote a 2.5-page story, and I gave it to Laddie when I came back to Los Angeles. And Laddie read it and said, yeah, it sounds good. Let's try to develop it. And that's what happened.
Wow, and that became an icon, a legend film.
I never expected it to be a hit. I just thought institutional comedies always seem to work. And what you have to do, you have to cast a cast of characters that are idiosyncratic. Each one is unique. So when they wear the uniforms, they're not blending into the wallpaper. Each one has a special character. And that's what Police Academy had. They had the guy that did the voices, Michael Winslow. They had Bubba Smith, the big, tall African-American football player who was a florist. We had Leslie Easterbrook, a beautifully built. Well, Marion Ramsey had a soft voice. The lead that we had was Steve Guttenberg, was just perfect for the role.
Did you come up with those characters?
In the original story that I wrote, I wrote probably the outline for maybe 4 of them. When I had meetings with the initial writers, Neil Israel and Pat Proft, 2 good comedy writers, which is another interesting story. Neil Israel and Pat Proft, I got them to write the first draft based upon my story. We talked a couple of days in their apartment and fleshed out the story a bit. When they presented the script to me, it wasn't good. It really had some good jokes in it. It had the podium joke, it had a major joke in it, and a couple of other jokes, but it was smutty. There was something about it that wasn't right, and I said, oh my God, that's it. It's going to be in turnaround. They won't make the picture. I didn't really, and the studio didn't like the script.
So you sent it to the studios?
Oh, with Alan Ladd. Alan Ladd was at Warner Brothers. Oh. He had the best deal at Warner Brothers at the time. He made some wonderful movies there. You look him up, Alan Ladd Jr. at Warner Brothers. Great. And by the way, at Fox, Alan Ladd was the one who said yes to Star Wars. I mean, after it was turned down at Universal. And so Laddie is one of the great studio heads of all time. An amazing guy. I get a call on the weekend at my apartment here in Malibu, and the fellow says, my name is Hugh Wilson. I'm a writer, screenwriter, and I want to direct. I said, yes, okay. He said, I have a show called WKRP Cincinnati. I said, wow, I know that show. It's a very funny show. He said, well, I created that show, he said. And I've directed a few of them, and I was at my agent's office, and I saw this script, Police Academy, and I picked it up, and I read it, and I got to tell you, I don't really like it. I love the idea, and I love some of the characters, and some of the jokes are terrific. He said to me, could you give me a weekend on this? I said, dude, you take a weekend on it, you better believe it. Now, this is a TV master writer, and you know what happens in TV sitcoms. You got to write overnight, you got to rewrite a whole episode. He came in Monday morning with the script that we shot that gave birth to 6 other police academies. It was Hugh Wilson's script that did it. That was the magic of it all. And then working together to help cast it was wonderful, with great casting directors, very important too. I said, Laddie, what did it do? He said, it's the best opening for Warner Brothers in spring ever. $8 million it's going to open to. The picture was a $4.2 million picture. And it did eventually 82 million domestic gross and 55 foreign gross. Right away, the studio said, get going on the next one, and then that's how it's been.
So you didn't know that it was going to be a big hit, right, during that time. So even watching it on screen, you can't really tell what the audience is going to.
You know, it's funny. All the movies I've made, I've never been on the set of one of my movies, even when I know the script is good, the cast is good, the director's good, the rushes are good, everything. There is something just, maybe, I don't know what happens sometimes to these wonderful pictures, that maybe it's something in in the moviola, the machine at the end that makes them not so good. But whatever it is, it takes all those elements together to make a picture into a hit. It really does. Sometimes serendipitously, something will happen that people are attracted to, like those horror pictures that are shot and for $50, they make 20 million. Regular making movie business, you never really know.
Until you actually go and make it, right?
I made pictures with George Cukor. I've made pictures with Mankiewicz. I've made pictures with Carol Reed. I've made pictures with Fellini. We become friends. We talk. They never know they're on a great movie. They just do they do their work day by day. They have a concept, and you hope it works. You really do. You make the movie in panic, and you release it in relief, because it's an intense thing, making movies. It's a serious business. It's not a frivolous business. If you're a producer that really is a hands-on producer, that means you have been the one that had the idea. Now, the idea may be you read a book, you read a newspaper article. Right now, I'm developing a book, Coming Through Slaughter, by a great writer, Michael Ondaatje. I read that book 20 years ago, and I'm still working on trying to get this picture made. Or it could be a newspaper article that you read. Or I once saw a 60-minute episode about a young girl who went to prison. I made the movie, Love Child, from that. The producer gets the idea. Then the producer's got to go out and put the other elements together. And the most significant element is story and script. And we have a saying in the business, it sounds corny, but if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. And that's the way it is with film. You've got to have a script. Then with the script, then you try to attract a good director. Sometimes the director and screenwriter are the same person. And then from there, you hope that your director and the project itself will attract good cast for it. And it doesn't always have to be stars, but it's just a cast that has sort of a melding together, something charismatic that works together, whether it's an action picture, comedy picture, romance, horror. In my years of making movies, and it's a lot of years, and I'm still going, every picture's a prototype. You've never done it before. You have the experience of how to do it, but you haven't had all those different elements. It's a new cameraman. It's a new writer. It's another director that you've never worked with. It's a composer. I like his music. Can he write for a film? It's the producer who is like, he puts it together. And when it works, boy, it's great. It's a great feeling. And even when it doesn't work sometimes, just to know that you've accomplished it is something worthwhile. I had a passion for film. Not a passion for it. I loved film. I enjoyed going to the movies with my mother. My mother used to take me to the movies all the time.
Yeah, speaking of that, a lot of filmmakers can understand this, but a lot of people not outside of film don't understand the process and what you have to go through, the ups and downs of being a producer or director. Could you elaborate more on that so more of the audience can understand?
In the days when the studios were just moved out here to California and they were forming the early days of the movie business, virtually everybody at the studio, from writers, directors, actors, every aspect of the film, they were under contract to studios. You had an employment contract, so it was a regular check coming in, and if you were an actor, you had certain provisions where you had to do certain pictures, and that's the way it was, and you were paid a certain amount of money. When the studio system sort of stopped, and this is certainly post-war, and it started when Cary Grant and Gary Cooper, and they started making their own companies so that they would own a significant part of the profits from their pictures. Some of the biggest stars then were those. It became a different situation. So we all became people who were looking for work. You finish one job and you're looking for work for the next job. We no longer have these long-term contracts at studios. It's a difficult game. Number one, if you want to get into the film business, you've got to focus on what aspect of the film business you want to get into initially. If you want to be a producer, the beginning, that's a tough shot, unless your dad and your family has a lot of money, or somebody, you've just won the lottery and all of a sudden you want to be a producer. If you want to be a producer, my suggestion is you start as somebody that works on the set, as an assistant. You don't even have to be paid. Find any possible way to get yourself acquainted with the vocabulary of making movies, with the mechanics of making movies, knowing what a grip is, knowing what a spark is, every aspect of contemporary cinematography is. And that's by always observing, keeping observing. Start low and then remain ambitious. as a producer. Try to have friends that are writers or young up-and-coming directors or up-and-coming actors. Also a business of a lot of friendships and a lot of acquaintanceships and a lot of people doing favors for other people in the business. You just develop credibility along the way. But each particular specialty in movie making or television making, there's a way of doing it. If you want to be a cameraman, you better learn the mechanics of it, and you go to school for it. Or you work as an apprentice for somebody who's willing to take the time for you. If you want to be makeup artist, go to makeup school. It's a profession. Movie making is not a game, it's a profession. It's to be taken very serious. A studio gives you $40 million to make a movie. Now, of course, today they're giving 120 million, 130 million. That's a lot of money. And you're responsible for it. And you have to know where that money's going. You have to know every department.
How do you develop the eye of what type of movies to make? Like, I mean, you pegged it right about what people want to watch. You know, like the Police Academy, that's why they did all the way up to 7.
My first movies, besides the documentary I did, the first movie I made was a horror picture because I realized horror pictures could be made inexpensively. I was living in Italy. Italy had castles. They had wonderful locations. You're going to war every day, and you got to have a buddy watch your back. And because time is money, it's an exciting life when you're shooting. When you're not shooting, you're like that. You can't wait to start. I've had joy at it, and I want to continue doing it. And I really appreciate speaking to you, Ace. And I'm very proud of your success, of what you've done. And you started, going from USC Film School and being able to make your movies the way you have. Very commendable. It's the toughest game in the world, and you've done it.
Thank you. But I'm still following over you, Paul, because you are my inspiration and my mentor. I want to thank you so much for being here, for the hollywoodceleb.tv, and for our young audience here to know from the masters of filmmaking, Paul Maslansky. So my last shot is going to be the drone, so I can take this beautiful shot of Malibu as I drive away from Paul Maslansky's home.